Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, this is Historic Hollywood, spotlighting the most influential and founding members of Hollywood.
Oh man, I missed our intro. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Historic Hollywood, a celebration of the cinema of yesteryear and the people who made it. Follow the network online, youtube.com/Popcorn Talk Network, and on Twitter at The Popcorn Talk. I am Lex Michael, all over social media at The Lex Michael, and I am here with...
Byron Thompson.
Karie Bible.
Kevin Odegaro.
Kevin, welcome. Very excited to have you with us today to talk about Frank Capra. Now, I wanted to start the conversation by asking all of you guys, as I often do on this show, how did you first come to the work of Capra? What drew you to his stuff, and how did you discover it in the first place? In any order, whoever wants to jump in.
All right, we guess we go this way now. Well, for me, like every outsider, It's a Wonderful Life.
Sure. Like, what was your initial experience with It's a Wonderful Life?
I mean, I was just blown away and just moved, and it's an annual tradition in our house, and then it made me want to see more of this man's films, which I did. I went through the whole library.
Sure.
So,
Karie?
Same thing. It's a Wonderful Life just ran constantly on TV when I was growing up. So it's almost like you could not, at some point, come across it and see it. So that was my first introduction, and then I got more into his other work once I was in film school.
Sure. Byron?
With me, it was Arsenic and Old Lace.
Because
I was a big mystery fan in high school, and somebody had told me about it, and I got a videotape copy of it. Loved it. We used to have a revival theater called Balboa down in Orange County, and they used to use a trailer for It's a Wonderful Life to sell their gift certificates and whatnot. And I had never seen It's a Wonderful Life, so that was what my connection was to that. And then, just like they said, after that, I wanted to see everything.
Sure. For me, I'm I think the youngest person at this table by
rub our faces
a couple
in
of
it.
years, but a couple like 2 or 3 years. But for me, like a lot of filmmakers of the era, I came to Capra's work almost backwards, because so many of his movies, It's a Wonderful Life being a perfect example, became over time so ubiquitous that I started soaking up pieces of it without realizing that that's what it was. And that was true in the case of many of his movies. As I was rewatching some over the past couple of days, I was remembering, in the case of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, before I saw that movie, I remember seeing the episode of The Simpsons, where Homer gets involved in producing a Mel Gibson starring big budget remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where on Homer's advice, the movie ends not with a big dramatic filibuster, but with Mel Gibson murdering everybody in the Senate room. I remember being 11 years old and seeing the movie Bandits with Bruce Willis, and there's a scene in that movie where he puts up a clothesline with a sheet on it to give Cate Blanchett's character a little bit of privacy, and references that he saw it in some old movie.
So you came to it all backwards.
Yes,
Okay.
that's how I came to a lot of Capra's films, but also a lot of films of the era, but much in that way. And what really, once I discovered Capra and started watching his movies, I think, and we can certainly talk a lot about this, there is such an earnestness and a purity of heart and a goodness of spirit to these movies that I feel like, especially now, you don't see. I feel like we've become, as a culture, very, very cynical and very snarky, and so seeing the earnestness and the genuine goodness of Capra's stories is very, very, to me, was very refreshing in the last couple of days when I was rewatching everything that I rewatched. So there's a ton that we can talk about, and we can start just about anywhere. So maybe it would behoove us to start a little bit early. Now, I know, Karie, you wanted to talk specifically about some of the pre-code movies that he made.
Yeah, I do want to say, though, he started working in 1921, and I'm a diehard silent era person. So unfortunately, not all of his silent films are available. I have seen a couple with Harry Langdon, but one thing I kind of wanted to focus on, at least I think is fascinating, is the Capra pre-codes. one thing that interests me about film is I'm always looking for something off the radar, in any sense of the word. That's my handle is Film Radar, on Twitter. So to me, I like the pre-codes because they're the Capra you didn't know yet. For example, most of these are female-driven. By the way, fabulous DVD box set. He worked with Barbara Stanwyck 5 times. The very first time is Ladies of Leisure from 1930. This is the film actually that made Stanwyck a star. This is what established that incredible career. And it's a terrific movie. And these have a female heroine, most of them in the center. They're complicated women's roles. I mean, one of them is the Miracle Woman. It's based on the phony preacher Amy Semple McPherson. And it's really very pre-code. And there's one, The Bitter Tea of General Yen. She falls in love with the man who kidnaps her. It's just, there's a lot of stuff going on that'll kind of make you reevaluate Frank Capra and sort of make you kind of see the early genesis of his talking motion picture work. And there's a great story that goes about how he met Stanwyck on Ladies of Leisure. Stanwyck had been a chorus girl in New York and came out here. Had 3 really bad movies in a row when she got to Hollywood and was very dejected, very depressed, just not happy here at all. And she had an audition for Capra. And he met her, really didn't like her, thought she was kind of glum and depressed and just like, didn't really want to even meet with her. And she came home in tears to her husband, Frank Fay, who is a very popular star, quickly on the wane at that point, and was just devastated. And Frank Fay was a tough guy. He picked up the phone, called Harry Cohn at Columbia, and said, "You can't do this. You can't treat my wife like this. How dare you? You've got to watch the screen test she made back east. You just have to watch it." And Capra's like, "I've already made up my mind. No." And so Cohn got Capra to watch Barbara Stanwyck's screen test, and he was absolutely blown away by a screen test that she did. And then he wound up reconsidering her and then working with her on Ladies of Leisure. And again, that's the film that really made her a star and launched her career.
And these are the ones. So this must have this projected him into Columbia Pictures, or was this before these pre-codes? Was it before Columbia Pictures?
These are during Columbia Pictures. And Ladies of Leisure with Barbara Stanwyck, which is such a good one. The Miracle Woman, which is great. Forbidden, another pre-code, and The Bitter Tea of General Yen. These are just great movies. And again, he's so great with actors. He's great with story and pacing. And again, pre-code, I think it's such an invigorating and interesting time in American film because they could tell stories they would not be able to tell after mid-1934.
Oh, sure.
There were many things going on in these movies that will surprise you.
Why is that?
Well, because basically from 1929 to about mid-34, they kind of got a little lax on the code. So people could do a lot of things.
I think let's explain for everybody, including me, pre-code.
Pre-code meant they dealt with topics that were shocking or off limits. For example, and it's not just sex, it's gambling, it's drinking, it's all
like I
sorts
was a prisoner of a chain gang was in the pre-code era.
It's violence. Right. There would have been a lot of different things. I mean, I just the other night rewatched a Norma Shearer pre-code, and one of her lines is, quote, "I'm wallowing in an orgy and I love it." I kid you not.
Right. Okay, so when code came, do you mean like G, PG? Is that what you mean by code?
I don't mean that. I mean they cracked down with a whip.
That was the Hays Code.
The Hays Code. They basically said, okay,
Hays
this is not...
in H-A-Y. How do you spell that?
H-A-Y-S. He was somebody who was a postal official that basically Hollywood brought in to help them circumvent what she's talking about.
Well, actually, he was brought in 1922, around the time the whole Arbuckle scandal was happening, but in mid-34 is when Joseph Breen got involved. And really, the code got teeth. It really didn't have teeth before mid-34. It got sharp fangs in mid-34.
Yeah, and in effect, it was essentially a very large, very aggressive censorship body.
Basically, yeah, in terms of it was very, very strict after that. And as historian and my great mentor Mark Vieira said, he said movies lost mature thought in a lot of ways when the code was enforced because you couldn't talk about some of the stuff that is in these films at this time.
And with these early Capra pre-code films, was it still, and I apologize for not having seen them, I didn't even know they existed.
They're all kind of off the radar, which is kind of why I wanted to bring them up to begin with.
But is it still, we still have the Capra-esque kind of little man fighting against
like
the
Ladies
big
of
man,
Leisure. Is that about the prostitutes?
Sense of justice.
Yeah, it is.
So that's what it's about?
She's a party girl. Okay, so that's a little bit. It's a thinly veiled way of saying But
does it still have the Capra touch?
I would say so. I mean, it's still got a beauty and a tenderness to the storytelling. Absolutely.
I think the thematic through line that you're describing, the one person, the one individual standing up and making a difference, that really came into effect more fully after It Happened One Night. I think the movie he made right after that was a movie called Broadway Bill, which was a screwball comedy about horse racing. And I think it was around that time where that theme really became a prominent through line in all of his movies.
Would you guys say it was his collaboration with the screenwriter Riskin that brought this kind of Capra-esque feel or tone out, or do you think he always had it?
Well, I think it's interesting. So to answer your question, I'm going to ask another one. I see that both Byron and Karie brought copies in of Capra's autobiography, name above the title. So I wanted to ask if either one of you wanted to talk a little bit about his very early life, because he himself personified a lot of the themes that he would work into his movies heavily. So Byron, maybe you want to jump in on this?
I would love to jump in. He grew up in a very difficult Sicilian neighborhood in Los Angeles. So he basically grew up in downtown LA when it was much more
a ghetto,
more like New York of the past, a very difficult time. And he, as he says in the book that Karie and I both brought, not only did he struggle, but he hated the struggle, and he hated the fact that you had to work so hard to get so little.
And this was also an immigrant.
Clearly, from an immigrant family.
He came over on a boat.
He came a boat in steerage with his family from Sicily.
Right.
There's a great story in the book that basically he was so irritated when he was back home in Italy that a letter came from his oldest brother, who they thought had died after going and herding sheep, when actually he had got away and got on a ferry to come to America, but he had been like basically an indentured servant. He was taken basically to Asia. He was taken all these places and mistreated, got to America, and then wrote this letter back to his family saying, I found the promised land. You have to come. And nobody in the family, including Frank, could read anything. So the priest in the town had to come read the letter, and it became so popular. It was like a TV show. All the people from the village kept coming and saying, I want to hear the letter. It was that entertaining because he was talking about something no one knew about America. So even though it took, I think, 7 years for it to happen, it's something that's very inspiring in the book. And that, I think, is what set off, like you said, his tone. Yes. Because he wanted to basically push that so hard. Even Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he tries to show the ethnicity as opposed to just the people.
Yes.
So I think that's a big part of who he's trying to be.
Absolutely. And I think it's telling, too, that after he graduated high school, he put himself through college. He went to Caltech and he studied chemical engineering. And despite graduating with that degree, he wasn't really able to find any work. He was living at home with his mother and his siblings, and he was the only one in the family that wasn't able to find a job. So
and ironically, the only one with an education.
Right. Exactly.
So he would hop from odd job to odd job to odd job until eventually he was, I believe he was helping sell books for a very small, an author that was self-publishing. And while he was doing that, he saw an opportunity for himself. There's a very, very tiny studio in San Francisco, I believe. And he saw a notice that, if you had experience, if you knew what you were doing, you could come and make, maybe like a one-reel film with them, make like $75. So he essentially called up this studio and said, yeah, sure. I moved to Hollywood and I know what I'm doing. I have experience. I work in the business. Sure. And he got this opportunity to do this little one reel for he made $75, cast it with amateurs. And from there made the jump over to, it was Cohn, was his name? Harry Cohn?
Harry Cohn.
What would become Columbia. And that's how he got in. He just worked his way up, made it all himself, and bluffed his way in.
And Columbia back then was an off the beaten path to studio. It was kind of the I don't know, it was the poor man's version of the studio, so that's why he was able to get name above title. And Harry Cohn was pretty generous about that with talent, and it was all them kind of taking a shot at something, which of course paid off.
I've seen archival photos of the Columbia Pictures in those early years. It was a dump. I mean, if MGM was akin to Tiffany's, Columbia was the 99-cent store. It was like Poverty Row, and so yeah.
And think of the place that would have now become Columbia Pictures and all the amazing stuff they turned out. But he was lucky he developed that great relationship with Harry Cohn to be able to get the creative freedom to be able to do the things he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And once he started churning out movies for Columbia in earnest, he became one of Coen's most trusted directors. Even though, and as we'll discuss further, a lot of his movies, there is a running theme in his career of many of his movies, at first, largely being written off, either during production. In the case of It Happened One Night, very famously, Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert did not want anything to do with this movie before and during making it. Or in the case of some of his other, even It's a Wonderful Life was not tremendously well received when it came out.
It was a failure.
Yes, so there are a number of examples in his career of movies that he made that were largely written off by people that later finally became embraced and received their due.
Gable considered it punishment to have to make, because again, if you're working at MGM, you can do no better than him. They're the best. So Columbia, that he was furious. That was punishment.
Well, to him, it was like being exiled to Siberia, I believe, is the story.
And Claude Colbert didn't even go to the Oscars.
No, they had to apparently pull her off of a train to get her there when they realized, oh, you're going to win. And It Happened One Night, noteworthy for a number of reasons, but also, I believe, the first motion picture to win all 5 of the big
right.
5 Academy Awards. Big 5 being...
And there's only 2 or 3 others.
There's only 2 others. One Flew
Silence
Over
of
the
the Lambs.
Cuckoo's Nest and Silence.
Yeah, it didn't happen again for about 4 years.
So explain to the audience what the Big 5 is.
So the Big 5 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay, either original or adapted.
And It's Happened One Night, and that's pretty much the first one that makes him Capra.
Yes.
Correct?
It was also the first. He won 3 Best Director Oscars. I believe the other 2, one was for Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and it's escaping me. The other, was it You Can't Take It With You, maybe was the third one?
I think so, in 38. I think so.
But the first motion picture to win
Was it Mr.
all
Smith?
of the Big 5, I don't believe it was Mr. Smith. I believe he was nominated.
Right, but he didn't get it.
No, but
didn't win.
it's Happened One Night, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Silence of the Lambs. The only 3 in Oscar history to sweep all 5 majors.
There have been, of course, a number of movies nominated in all 5 categories.
But not winning.
Right.
Winning, no.
Only 3 examples of that.
Incredible.
And it took 40 years for it to happen again after It Happened One Night, which to me is astounding.
What are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say this, Byron, it's significant.
The Happened One Night, though, I consider that one of the best romantic comedies ever made. Because today, romantic comedies aren't that good. It's like It Happened One Night, they don't make them like that anymore. I know that's a cliche, but it's true.
Well,
and that film proves it.
I agree with you completely, and I feel, and obviously I'm not the target audience for the majority of romantic comedies. There are, I think, some excellent ones from the 90s and 2000s a little more recently, but many of them, especially the more recent ones, boil down to 2 people going like, I'm hot, you're hot, let's be hot together, and that's the entire movie. Whereas you look at something like It Happened One Night, and both Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert have fully developed personalities. They are insanely charming. They play off of each other so well, and their relationship is actually compelling. You actually buy their relationship as it builds because you watch it happen, which is even more astounding to me considering that neither of them wanted to be there. Yeah.
There's another reason why they didn't want to be there. It's also one of the first films, besides the 5, it's one of the first Hollywood films that was shot entirely on location.
Sure.
So, no disrespect, but what Karie said was right. They're so used to the studio. Frank's like, oh, we're going to go down to like El Segundo and shoot on the side of the road. It's like they didn't really like to be out in the field because they were so used to being catered to.
Right. And there are a number of things. We were talking about the code a couple of minutes ago. This movie came out just before the code took effect. So there are a number of things that you see in this movie that even 6 months to a year later, they would not have been able to get away with. Obviously, one of the most famous, if not the most famous scene in the movie is the hitchhiking scene.
Right.
Where Clark Gable's trying to demonstrate proper hitchhiking etiquette to Claudette Colbert, and a whole traffic jam worth of cars pass by, and all Colbert has to do is show a little bit of leg,
right,
and they get a ride immediately. I don't think you would have been able to include that scene had it come out half a year later. Even something as simple as Clark Gable taking off his shirt and not having an undershirt on, you would not have been able to get away with.
It's all about the double beds for the married couples.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
Dick Van Dyke style. Sorry.
So that struck me for a number of reasons. Of course, I want to jump around a little bit because I know we all did different prep and we all looked up a bunch of different things in preparation for this show. Now, Kevin, I know you really wanted to talk about It's a Wonderful Life, and there's a lot a lot to unpack with It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, I feel bad bringing it up now because...
Never feel bad about bringing up that one.
Well, we could do a whole show on it, though. There's so much.
And probably will at some point. I think we have to. But, listen, 3 of the 4 people on the panel were introduced from our panel, were introduced to Capra just through that film. Karie, you were mentioning you hosted an It's a Wonderful Life screening, and it was packed and with all different ages, correct?
Yeah, I just co-wrote a book called Hollywood Celebrates the Holidays, and I was asked to introduce It's a Wonderful Life at the Arrow and the Egyptian theaters by the American Cinematheque. And it was sold out. I was kind of shocked because first off, it was raining, but also the fact that it's on TV constantly. It's on DVD. I thought, okay, we'll see if anyone shows up. It was sold out, and it was all different ages, all different demographics. I mean, it was amazing at how it transcended all of these things.
The interesting thing about the film is that I'm so grateful that Jimmy Stewart and Frank Capra were able to live long enough to see it succeed. And as you said, Byron, it was not successful. It was his first movie he made after the war.
Right.
And he had said he had a little bit of self-doubt because he'd made some war pictures, and I don't know, we probably won't cover them here, but
it's something that I want to touch on because to me it's fascinating.
At some point we will. So he gets out and then he decides to jump in to make this, but he also starts his own studio. So if you're familiar with United Artists, you know that's when the artists came together. It was Fairbanks, Chaplin, and Mary Pickford
and
right?
D.W. Griffith.
And they said, let's get away from the studios.
Do our own thing.
We'll do our own thing. So this was pretty much the second time years later that it was being attempted. It was Capra, and I'm sorry at the time, it's escaping me for the 2 partners he had at the time.
William Wyler and George Stevens.
Thank you very much. And so they had all this hope. And they put so much money into It's a Wonderful Life that it was actually 3 to 4 acres was the set for It's a Wonderful Life, which you would never see today.
To the Bedford Falls, that's how it was.
It was this entire thing that they built, and he'd had the past working relationship with Stewart, who was like, if it's for Frank, I'm all in. And so they go into this thing with such incredible high hopes, and through just a bunch of different things. It's released very softly. They didn't want to market it as a holiday movie. It kind of came and went. And then when the copyright of the film lapsed somewhere in the early 70s and no one picked it up, just a clerical error, then it went onto every single TV station in the world. Every station manager around the country could get this movie for free. They put it on, they repeated it continually, and then all of a sudden the message got out and everyone got reawakened. Sorry. Oh my God, of all people, it's me.
Kevin,
sorry.
for shame.
Really?
For shame.
Shame. Yeah, really, Phil? Like it's the guy who runs the place, so it's even worse than me. But anyway, the film gets rediscovered, and as we'll talk about Capra's career, pretty much after this film, it was kind of all downhill for him, and he becomes very disillusioned. But much like George Bailey, he almost lives that out to a degree where by the end of his life, he's like, I don't care that I wasn't really able to make any significant films after that film, and I don't care that I don't own that film and I'm not making money. I've truly had a wonderful life. I'm very blessed. How much more money do I need? What I'm so thrilled is that the message of that movie is still getting out there, and for him to live to 94 and just see it continue and just not stop, and him to kind of go to the grave knowing that this is going to continue for Christmases pretty much, in my opinion, forever.
Sure.
I could gush about that movie forever, but it was such a significant part of his life because I feel it was him at his peak, and I feel like I say the same thing with Stallone and Rocky. It's like he almost throws that story out to the universe, and then he ends up living it.
Sure.
Where his career goes away, he's kind of mocked, he's kind of a joke, and now all of a sudden, the last, say, 10 years, he's back, and he's got 3 franchises he's part of, but he's lived that whole kind of underdog thing, and I feel like Capra put that out there and then lived it himself. And I know me, I'm even though I know it is a different time, I still feel a lot of the principles of the film stand out, and I know for myself I'm inspired to be a better person every time I see that film, and I don't think I'm the only one.
Sure, you're not. And you brought up Jimmy Stewart. He says in the book that he would not make another film after he came back from the war, because like you said, that was the first film he did after the war, both of them, because obviously Jimmy Stewart was involved in World War II as well. He served. They basically, he was going to make a Capra film regardless, and he said at the time that he didn't care that it didn't do so well, but as years have gone on, he says that is clearly his best work. Yeah. And before, like you said, before he passed on, he said, I've done so many movies and been so happy and had so much control, because you talk about the Stallone franchise. When he did Winchester 73 and worked with Anthony Mann and all this stuff, he created his own production company, much like what Capra did, was more successful at it. But he never really said anything about It's a Wonderful Life until, like you said, years later when it boomed on TV. And then he basically said, out of everything I've done, that's the best I did. Like you said, it's everybody kind of at their peak, even though they may not have known it.
And it's just such a great message, too, for you people who are out there who are artists, or people who are just doing the right thing. That just means so much more than, I would think, than making hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, to have a piece of work like that just positively affects people's lives. Forever.
One thing I think may have been contributed to why the screenings were so packed that I was at, if you read the news, I mean, there are horrible things going on every day in the news, shootings and war and refugee. I mean, it's horribly depressing. And this movie kind of has such a message of hope. And I think people want that. People need that. And maybe that was one of the reasons people were like, let's just not watch it on TV. Let's go to the movies together as a family. A lot of families.
Sure.
Go see that in the theater. And
well, and that's what I was saying at the top of the show about what speaks to me the most strongly about all of Capra's work, but yes, specifically It's a Wonderful Life, is that I do feel like, and it has become increasingly easy for all of us collectively to be very, very cynical and be very, very snarky. I feel like a lot of people now, especially in the age of social media and the internet, a lot of people are snarky for the sake of being snarky. And yes, I'm a fan just as much as anybody else of well-placed, clever snark, but past a certain point, snark for the sake of snark is boring to me. And it's easy. And there's so much of it.
That's a great point. It's easy.
I have this conversation.
It's harder to be Capra. It's harder to be those characters, and it's hard to even put that stuff out there.
Yeah, lately I've had this conversation a lot in regards to The Flash on the CW, because it is so crazy earnest, and much like a lot of Capra's movies, a lot of people receive that and are not used to it now, and so to them it just plays as corny, when in fact it's incredibly genuine and incredibly positive. And Karie, I agree with you 100%, especially now in a time where you turn on the news, you look at the internet, and if you allow yourself, it can really, really, really bum you out.
Oh, yeah.
I think it is crucial to connect with stories like that. Stories like Kevin, what you were describing, that inspire you to just do just a little bit better, for you, for other people. And it's fantastic. And you see that a lot in Capra's movies, especially starting, like I said, after Broadway Bill forward. You see that quite a bit, and it's great. Were you going to say something?
Well, I think that the term Capricorn, which is basically utilized to define him at the time.
The cynics did. I mean,
right, because they were kind of like making fun of him, but in a sense, that's what really attracted me to him, because like you said, the message was all there. And I kind of compared it at the time, because I was very young, to like the Spielberg films at that time, because they were the only things that were positive.
There's always hope in most of the Spielberg films,
and especially when I was younger, that's how I felt. I'm not as jaded as Lex, perhaps, but I hope for the best, because I think that's what that movie's about. And I abandoned that movie many years ago. My wife's the one that reintroduced it to me, and basically says, you need to watch this maybe more than once a year.
What movie?
It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, yes.
Because she kind of thought I'd lost my way, because that happens to everybody, and I feel that movie, like you said, that's the best message. And you made the comment about all those people coming. I think that's fantastic. That's inspiring in itself.
Yeah, I just kind of was watching people walk in, and again, you saw so many families, you saw kids, and I was like, oh, that's great. Maybe they'll see this and they'll realize how magical classic movies can be, and they'll realize what it's like to see them in 35 on a huge screen, and they'll fall in love with it the way all of us did.
Yeah, and it's great too. Like I watched it yesterday just in preparation for this show, and I feel like it has been. Well, my thought going in. This is my dark confession. I thought going in, well, I need to watch this again because it's been so long since I've seen it. It's been so many years that it essentially doesn't count. I'm watching it, and I'm really enjoying it, and I don't know, like 40, 45 minutes into the movie, I am sitting there, but I, take a step back outside of myself and I go, oh, wait a minute. I've never seen this movie. I believed wholeheartedly that I had seen it because of how ubiquitous it became from soaking up different pieces of it. I'd seen portions of it, all over the place growing up, but it wasn't a staple in my household like it was for many people. But I had been living under the impression that I had seen this movie. So I was experiencing all of it. I know the plot, of course, like I think everybody does, whether they've seen the movie or not, but I was experiencing it completely fresh. And most of what I thought the movie was, where the angel Clarence shows him what the world would be like if he had never been born, that's maybe the last half hour of this over 2-hour movie. So it's all working on me crazy well. And we get to the end, and Byron, you joke about me being jaded. You're not entirely wrong. I think it's maybe a generational thing. But you get to the end of the movie when George is back and, everybody in the town found out that he was in trouble, and they all bring the money, and the day is saved, and it gets, I'll be the first to admit, maybe a little overly sentimental for my taste. But then he picks up the book and he sees what Clarence wrote him in the book, and it's the line that no man is a failure who has friends. And if that doesn't get you in your soul, you are a robot. I am not the slightest bit embarrassed to admit that me sitting alone watching this movie in my room, it got a little bit, maybe a little bit dusty in the room for me. Like it works like gangbusters. And I'm saying all this so that people that are I'm 25, and I know a lot of Byron, Karie, we've all talked about how a lot of people my age are very, very foolishly reluctant to dive into older movies. I say all this in the hopes that somebody who's my age who hasn't bothered to watch It's a Wonderful Life yet can watch it and have the same experience that I had with it.
I think from when he made this turn for the Capra-esque style, there's almost each one of his films has, I think, a moment where whether it's the character filibustering in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington,
so good,
passing out, and in comes the rival senator to finally just break down. You have that moment, or if it's the moment where the one character, his nemesis in the movie, in one of his movies, plays the harmonica, the rich father, and it's not. It happened one night. I'm blanking now. It was, and it wasn't Mr. Deeds, but it's in this. It's in the It's a Wonderful Life thing. I have my list here somewhere.
It's not Meet John Doe. So
no, there's one more.
You Can't Take It With You?
Yes, that is it, sir. Thank you very much. And that moment where this mean kind of rich, alpha male just kind of breaks down and realizes the money's nothing. He's losing his daughter. He's losing his soul. He's losing everything, and he has no friends. And he plays this harmonica with, at that time, Lionel Barrymore, who's the bad guy
Mr.
and
Potter,
who's the villain in It's a Wonderful Life. But in this, he's not. He's one of the protagonists. Again, speaks to Capra working with the same people and then pulling the different performances out of them, good and bad, to be good guys and bad guys. But he always has those one moment. I feel like each one of those films in the Capra-esque era, if we're going to call it that, where it just makes me a little misty.
Sure.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, that, and it's interesting to me too, the development of that movie, how it was bounced around so extensively, because it was based on this short story called The Greatest Gift by a gentleman named Philip Van Doren Stern, and he wrote it in '39, and he was trying to get it published and was having no success whatsoever getting a buyer for this story. So eventually he decided, well, you know what, I'm just going to distribute it myself. This will be my Christmas card. So he starts sending them out, and somebody at RKO gets a hold of it and says, you know what? I like this, buys it, and their intention is we're going to maybe develop this into a vehicle for Cary Grant. And that obviously never panned out, and it wasn't going anywhere. But then Capra read the story, said, wow, I actually really like this material. So RKO, because they had a distribution deal with Liberty, the company that Capra started that we were talking about previously, because they had that deal in place, they sold Capra the rights to this story and said, here, you know what, you also have these 3 other scripts for free. So Capra and this team of writers he put together took the best parts of that story and then what they felt were the strongest elements of the other 3 scripts, and they combined it into what became the script for It's a Wonderful Life. And I just find that fascinating that something so affecting and so beloved was at its genesis point essentially cobbled together from a lot of disparate parts. And I feel like you can't make that work unless you imbue the thing with a ton of heart and a ton of passion, which is obviously there. I mean, it's there in every frame of that movie, which to me is crazy.
I think that speaks to Capra's talent too, to be able to pull it all together, because you had so many different people that were, even the music was like, there was a full score and he threw the score out and then brought in like music that his company had just owned. I mentioned Robert Riskin, his screenwriting partner, who he had a amazing working relationship with, but personally they had grave differences. Riskin was very left-wing, and Capra, ironically, was very right-wing, and that's what I'd like to talk to you guys about too, because it's a little bit confusing for his movies. They don't seem very right-wing to me. Conservative in values and maybe in morals, but not in so much as wanting, It's a Wonderful Life. Isn't it so much, George says, is it too much to ask for every man and woman to be able to have a roof over their head and a fireplace?
It's incredibly liberal,
right?
And it's almost the opposite of like what you find out later about him as a person.
So it's
like Trumbo, the movie that's out. It's similar in that sense. It's like these things that they write say one thing, not necessarily what they are, so to speak. And he had much difficulty later on. I'm sure Karie can tell you a lot about it, because I know it's a big part of that book with Sinatra, because of exactly what you're talking about. The same problems that he had with his screenwriter friend. They basically saw things very differently, and that became difficult in the workplace, I guess.
What I wonder, though, and again, I'd have to read more into the details, but I think being right-wing back in that day was kind of a different thing than it is today.
Sure.
Today, it's a whole different thing.
So today it's almost anti-people,
right?
Yeah, it's insidious.
And it wasn't
anti-people almost.
Well, no. So an older Democrat said that to me recently. He said, "You know what? Listen, just don't. You can be a moderate, but don't be a Republican." He said to me, because they just are anti-people. They're not, which is, I know a Republican would probably, attack us for saying that, but I think you're right. I don't think it was anti-people sentiment.
It didn't have that
then.
level then.
But with Riskin, it was alleged that when Capra used to talk about the Capra touch, it's a famous story. We don't know if it's urban myth or it really happened. Just disputing sides, but apparently Riskin gave him 120 pages. Blank, handed it to him and said, "Hey Frank, put the Capra touch on this," because he always talked about the Capra touch, but he didn't mention Riskin in the screenwriting. So Riskin, the majority of the films before It's a Wonderful Life, when we get into the Capra era, this guy writes, and a lot of people feel that he is the one that put Capra on the path of this little man against the system. Clearly it wasn't all him, because It's a Wonderful Life, Riskin was not involved, but I feel like he was instrumental in igniting that path for him. So I just want to give a mention to him, because he's not really well known. Sure. He ended up dying in the 50s, and from what I understand, he and Capra didn't really speak at the end of his life. But I would not go so far as to say he was he was responsible for the Capra touch, because again, It's a Wonderful Life was done without him. But I do think that he had an influence over Capra in terms of the little man fighting uphill.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you completely in as much that we talked a bit about Capra's upbringing, and I think Capra essentially lived that. So I think he had that in him to begin with, but I think it was Riskin who, in Riskin, he found a partnership through which he could really give that a voice, which I think you need. I feel like because obviously movie making in any era is an incredibly collaborative art form, and so even if Capra did embody all of that, even if it was flowing from every pore on his body, you need somebody that you can trust, somebody that you can collaborate with effectively to help bring all of that to life and to be able to present it effectively to not just other collaborators but to audiences. And I think Riskin was that guy.
I just want to add, even when we talk about directors on the Popcorn Talk, their movies are never made by one person. It really is a collaborative effort, and there are so many great cinematographers, editors, production designers, screenwriters, costumers. I mean, for every director, there is a legion of artists and craftsmen behind those scenes helping make that film happen. And a lot of times those people really don't get the credit they deserve.
Agreed. because they're not traditionally not high-profile positions. They tend not to get as much face time as a lot of, whether it's actors, directors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree. I think highlighting the work that they do is very crucial. Especially, you look at Capra's movies, they're great-looking movies. The scenic design on some of his movies alone, I'm just talking about It's a Wonderful Life, the amount of work that went into, look at the stark contrast between the world that George Bailey knows and then when Clarence shows him a vision of a world in which he does not exist. You look at the contrast between Bailey's world and then Pottersville. That alone, to me, is staggering.
Yeah.
The amount of work that had to go, and the amount of people that had to work hours and hours and hours every day to make that happen, whose names, I'll be the first to admit, I don't know the names of all of these craftspeople. But the movie doesn't exist.
A lot of them
without
didn't get credit the way they do today. There's people like Cedric Gibbons at MGM or William Cameron Menzies, which there's a book that just came out about him. But a lot of those, they didn't do massive credits like they do today. But there's just so many of those people that deserve credit. And also, they worked on tight budgets and tight deadlines, too. I mean, it's really, I'm really in awe of the work of those people and what they contributed to all of these films.
Yeah. So I do want to jump around a little bit. Kevin, you mentioned some of the pictures that Capra made during the war, and I did want to touch a little bit on his wartime activities because I just think it's very, very telling about who he was. He served in both wars. He wasn't actively in combat, but specifically during World War II, when that happened, obviously his directing career had already started to take off.
Mind you, he'd already served in World War I.
Yes, and I believe he spent a lot of that time teaching math because he had the engineering background. I believe he taught mathematics to other soldiers. Having done that, come back from that, begun his filmmaking career in earnest. When World War II happened, almost immediately after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he re-enlisted, and I believe I have his rank here somewhere. Yes, he was commissioned as a major in the Army, and he was also at the time president of the Screen Directors Guild, and he gave that up as well to go serve. And a lot of it had to do for him, I believe.
One of the founders of the Directors Guild, by the way.
Yes.
And
a lot of it had to do with, he did come to this country on a boat in the steerage section with his family and worked his way up. And I think a lot of it for him was, this country has given me everything, so I'm going to give back.
And we do see this today with so many immigrants too. That sentiment of like, they're so grateful, and thankful. And and he's got that, and he's going to give back. And it was General Marshall he works directly with.
Yes.
Who says, you're my guy. I need you. And we don't want to Germany is making propaganda films, and they are the bad guy, and we want nothing to do with them. We don't want to be anything like them. So we don't want to make propaganda films. We want to make films that really educate people on different aspects of who we are. Let's let the soldiers know what they're fighting for.
Yes.
Go. And he went to work, and he did, how many, 7 or 8 or 10?
It was the Why We Fight series, which was seven pro-American documentary films that became pretty popular. I believe actually at one point Winston Churchill ordered them shown in theaters all over Great Britain during the war. And the whole point is, it's exactly what you were saying. It's, let's show our boys why it is so important that we fight this fight. So to me, that speaks volumes about Capra's character, that he devoted years of his life specifically just to, let's create this thing to pep up our guys, because this is an important fight, and we're fighting for this country, like I said, like, it's given me so much. So I wanted to give back to it. And I don't know, because Byron and Karie, you guys read the autobiography and I did not. I didn't know if there was anything specifically that you remember gleaning from the book about that era in his life.
Well, his two friends, William Wyler and George Stevens, were in the same boat, even shooting supposedly some of the first color film of World War II. And basically they kind of had this idea that, like you said, we've been given so much. I'm sure you're familiar with that too, Karie, about how they basically said, this is a war we can't lose. So they have to do everything they can. And of course, just like you said, the Why We Fight series, George Stevens and William Wyler, his two friends, maybe not as much as he did, but tried to contribute as much as they possibly could with the skill set, being directors, obviously.
Sure.
Not something you can easily correlate to war, so to speak. So,
Right.
yeah.
And he was a triple Oscar winner
Yeah.
by the time World War II happened.
Right.
So his career wasn't just taking off. I mean, he was at the peak
He was
when
at the
he
peak.
went off and did this. So that definitely, it speaks volumes about his character, for sure.
Yeah, and the collaborations on these projects were very interesting to me. Like, and in doing my research, I discovered, because I have not seen the Why We Fight series in its entirety, but I learned the animated charts that he used in the production were created by Walt Disney and his animators. He brought on Dmitry Tiomkin to do music, who he would collaborate with. Again, he did the music for It's a Wonderful Life, and we talked a little bit about him when we talked about Howard Hawks back in our
Right.
first episode,
That's
because
correct.
he did the music for Rio Bravo, which
Right.
would then directly inspire Ennio Morricone's spaghetti western scores.
And Giant, among others. I mean, he's a prolific composer for sure.
Again, another behind-the-scenes craftsman and artist,
Yes, and Dmitry Tiomkin, somebody else who I don't think gets his due nearly as much as he should. So, what I'm trying to think, like, where should we jump to?
Well, so then, he obviously does It's a Wonderful Life. Before that, what we probably should at least touch on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
For sure.
Because that was not an easy one to make, because our country was starting to get into the path of the blacklist.
Yes.
And being anti-government was not popular. And I know overseas, there was concern over the countries overseas seeing it and thinking our country was weak at a time where we needed to be strong,
Right.
going into World War II. And but he stuck to his guns, as did Harry Cohn, and made the film they wanted to make. And I think that took an awful lot of courage. It's interesting. I'd love to know what it said in the book about the blacklist, because I know he teetered on being investigated, but was never called.
Right.
And I swear the only reason he wasn't called was because he did so much for the country.
Oh, I think that's the
Right.
reason for sure.
Right, but you would think that, everyone else was at least called and brought in for a conversation, and the fact that he wasn't, I think it's because he had done so much. What did the book say? I'm curious to say what he said about the blacklist.
It kind of said what you already said about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It says that basically, or he even says, because it's kind of his autobiography, obviously, that he was not going to change the way he felt just because somehow there was a witch hunt. And I think by having that attitude, and like you said, doing so much for the country, somehow he kind of got bypassed. But he didn't think that what they were, the weird part is, he didn't think what they were doing was necessarily wrong at the time, because he didn't really understand it, I think. Is
The blacklist,
right.
he didn't think the investigations were wrong?
Right, because he didn't really understand what the enemy could be. I don't think anybody really did. This invisible enemy of communism, I think it was very open to a lot of people. He wasn't so sure, because maybe somebody could be a danger. I don't think he really fully understood it.
And an immigrant who's so grateful to be here.
For the country,
he
right.
probably
Loves the country.
He wouldn't understand a Trumbo
right.
saying, like,
how could you do
Edward
that?
G.
Yeah.
Robinson loved our country too. He was also an immigrant, and
but more evolved, maybe.
that whole
No,
blacklist.
no,
No, that's
he
right.
really-
Yeah, that's right.
Just more evolved, more open-minded. But I think if you as Lex was saying, if you're in steerage on your way here and you're completely impoverished, and then all of a sudden you have this wonderful, blessed life, you're like, wait, why would we crap on this? Like, our other in any way, shape, or form. So then you have blind patriotism, but I understand where that would come from, and I actually appreciate it, because when I even in this time, being a fan of Trumbo, I thought the movie was magnificent, and it was so wrong what happened to our people, because part of our country is built on that. But at the same time, it was confusing to me, some of the things they were complaining about, when we know now from what Russia did to their people and the countries they took over. It was really not, and we've never seen communism succeed ever.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm glad he kind of went off on his. He stuck to the George Bailey nice simple life of. He lived in Bedford Falls in his brain, Anyway, I was curious, and then the Sinatra thing I would love to know what you mentioned Frank Sinatra.
Well, let's just pretend that you and I have different tastes in music. Not that we do. But
So Sinatra did not like his films, or he did not like Sinatra's work? What was this?
I think Sinatra at the time had become a player, a big Hollywood player, which he did not start that way. From Here to Eternity was his first role. You know, he basically got that shot. So
it was
to
his
speak.
first big role that won him the Oscar. But I think he'd been in films before that.
Okay,
but
so
that was the film.
So Capra's feeling about that was
that he's Frank Capra, and he obviously knows how to make a movie. And Sinatra was in conflict with that thinking because of his success. Well, I don't necessarily think we need to do it that way. And Capra's like, I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying. And I think that hurt those movies because there's great stuff in those movies. It just could have been better if they had maybe been a little bit more in sync, because they had a really bad time. I think they made 2 movies together, and it was the only reason why they made the 2 is because of the money, obviously. But it was a miserable experience, I guess, for both of them.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I love Sinatra. I do. But the man had a gigantic, colossal ego.
Oh, sure.
And he basically wanted to do concerts at night and party and do whatever. So he did one take, and then that's it.
Right.
And even if the director didn't like it, he's like, no, I do one take. I'm going to go to the spa.
I know what I'm doing.
I'm going to go drink.
Right.
I mean, he thought he knew. And Louis Milestone, who was like a brilliant silent filmmaker, had been in films forever. He would tell Louis Milestone, no, I'm not doing this. You don't do that. You know, he kind of, it was Frank's world. You're just kind of living in it.
Right.
And that was Frank.
That's absolutely
I think.
correct.
So,
Well, you know, so Frank in the film world for sure. Frank in the, you know, he did a lot. I mean, Frank. This isn't a Frank. It is historic Hollywood. So I want to say he stuck up, believe it or not, for minorities and for gays and for even the blacklisted writers.
Albert Maltz. He tried to hire Albert Maltz.
So he did a lot of great things. But you're right. But he
did.
was the one take, and you know, I'm just going to waltz in and do it. And you know, if anyone who makes a film, you know, this is your baby.
Yeah.
And I can see that. And I know it's good that we mentioned that, because this is what began his disillusionment after It's a Wonderful Life. So It's a Wonderful Life is not very successful. And one of the things that he mentions in these years with his disillusionment is the stars are getting too much power, which is what speaks to the fact that Frank has now a say. And then he was talking about the drugs and the debauchery and just our culture, and he even mentioned homosexuality too.
There's an amazing, to exactly what you're saying, there's an amazing quote that I found, and it's, no, I just lost it. Where'd it go? It's, so he was talking about his disillusionment with Hollywood filmmaking at that point, and his words were, quote, practically all the Hollywood filmmaking of today is stooping to cheap, salacious pornography and a crazy bastardization of a great art to compete for the patronage of deviants and masturbators.
Can I say this, though? Drugs, alcohol, and all sorts of sexual things did happen in silent era Hollywood too. I mean, from the very beginning,
it was the best. You had no sexually transmitted diseases, no taxes. They did whatever.
No, they had diseases back then. Believe me, they did.
Not like, but
there was.
They weren't going to die from them. Let me say that. Well, actually, they probably would before penicillin.
They did. Penicillin didn't happen to work. But what I am saying though is that the studio system crumbled after World War II. Sure. So there's that. The culture radically shifted in America at that time. You had the post-war film noir cycle, which we've kind of talked a little about in previous episodes.
Well, and with the studios going away, you could not hide and protect everybody, because they kept a lot of that stuff in the dark. That was just, you know, for the 1%, but they're always getting out to now to the public.
The rise of television. I mean, you had massive cultural and business shifts going on all throughout the industry at that time. So I think there's kind of a ton of different reasons for him to feel that way.
He just didn't, he didn't evolve. And it's sad because you look at Clint Eastwood, who's in his mid-80s, and I'm blessed enough to have a friend who's going to be producing his next 6 films.
Wow.
And you know what I mean? So
that's a hero.
But this is a guy that's still obviously is evolving and and growing and but when you get to that state of back in our day when we made films, even when you some of the old actresses, even whether it's Bette Davis, you see their interviews at the end, and it's all about disparaging Hollywood of that day compared to their day.
Sure.
Whereas when you see Dustin Hoffman, some of our older actors, some of the smarter older actors, they're embracing today.
Yes.
And there were some actors back then and some directors back then who embraced the day and kept evolving. I feel like that kind of limited him, because the fact that he didn't just grow and evolve with it. Okay, times are changing. Things are more open now. Families are changing.
Sure.
That can also be hard to do if you look at the number of actors, actresses, directors who transitioned into 30, 40, 50, 60-year careers. There's not a lot of them. Very few. I mean, Joan Crawford, toward the end she did disparage the newer Hollywood, but she had a career from the 20s up through the 70s. That is not easy to do. And think of every actress that wanted to do that and did not, compared to Joan. So I think adjusting to different, it's hard to do. I really think it's a challenge.
Karie, a minute ago you mentioned, specific cultural shifts, and you mentioned specifically that this disillusionment period for Capra essentially coincides with the classic noir cycle. And it's interesting that was a time where the public at large was ready for something that pitch black, which of course is almost the total antithesis of what Capra did.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so he was trying to adjust and didn't, and then he tried to do a couple of things with the military. He was invited to join a think tank at the Defense Department.
Well, he re-enlisted for the Korean War, and they reject him.
Yes.
And he was heartbroken.
And he was also denied.
They said he was too old.
Yes, and then he was denied the necessary clearance to join this think tank, which also I think was a bit of a blow, especially after all that he had done in his military career. And then, by the early 1950s, he had more or less retired. He would go on to make a couple more theatrical narrative movies, but at that point he was largely, I know he did a lot of work at Caltech, his alma mater, and he made these like science documentaries.
Okay, Byron. I remember the science documentaries. They were in high school. I mean, in junior high. Do you remember them?
I do. I absolutely remember them.
And it would be, check them out. They're on YouTube.
They're all available. You can find them.
And they played. They were done in the later 50s, and in the 70s and 80s. Your teacher would wheel in the projector, so the AV geek would come in, and he'd play it, and it was that
was me,
and it was Nemo, me too, and it was an animated character, Nemo, and there was another actor who played Dr. Research. And the actor was a really gifted character actor whose name is I'm forgetting, but. They were really good films that telling you about the digestive system or about the heart. And these things played, as I said, into the mid 80s. And the only reason they wouldn't play today as much is because it would really come off dated, between the voice and but if you cut around it, if you brought in a new narrator, they would be fine.
They would play fine.
Yeah, and unless the science I'm sure is a little bit dated as well. But they were great, and who would have thought, as watching these as a little kid, that this is the work of the great Frank Capra.
And if the younger audience may not know necessarily what we're talking about, if they've seen Jurassic Park, they redo that entire sequence when they explain how the DNA has been extracted.
Yes!
It's no different than those films, except it's Spielberg and it's DNA, but it's exactly the same. He has an animated character, and he's the host. It's basically, in some ways, a kind of a tribute to what he had done.
I'm sure it was.
For sure.
Very cool. Yeah, it was really something. And then I know after that he goes on to remake. He does Pocket Full of Miracles, right?
Yes.
Which is the remake.
Betty Davis.
Which, even though Betty Davis, I felt it was not as strong as the original. What did you guys think?
I didn't think so either. When Lex had said that he made films later in his career, I kind of feel like you said he was disillusioned. I think that it showed in his work. Not that I don't enjoy it. It's just that it has a different tone.
Yeah.
And I think that that's because, like you said, he was changing very much as a filmmaker, as we all do.
Well, and the Pocket Full of Miracles, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm forgetting something, but I believe that was his final theatrical narrative feature.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think the movie, his final movie was Rendezvous in Space, which was a science industrial that he made for a company to screen at the 64 World's Fair. And then was screened at the New York Hall of Science after the film ended, or the fair rather ended, and that was his final movie.
And it just blows me away, you guys, that he would live 34 more years.
Live till 91.
And not make another, do you know what I mean? But that's many, many years. And to not do his art, it had to be something. And I'm stunned, quite frankly. I was always stunned by that fact that he never was able to make more. And studying him, I understand why, but still, I always felt that there was maybe, I wish we got to see more of him, although, I mean, how much more can we ask for than the body of work we received?
When I had first discovered him, like you said, I fell in love with everything that he did, but I found out that he was spending a lot of time at La Quinta Inn out in Palm Springs, because I guess that's where he lived. And it's like the 30 or whatever plus years after he stopped, it just seemed like he was always kind of holding court. He would talk to anybody. He would do any interviews or whatever, like the book that he did. And he wanted to talk, not necessarily in a disparaging way, but it's like, you're right, all that energy could have been making more films. But he definitely had a lot to say, not necessarily always nice.
I want to say, I read some sort of, there's Quentin Tarantino's been doing a lot of interviews lately, of course, with Hateful Eight. I know, Lex, you love Quentin.
I do.
And I think he said something to the effect of, directors have a shelf life. Yeah. Most of us, we cannot sustain a huge level of filmmaking or success over a long period. The people who've done it are few. Quentin's, I want to make 10 films and I'm done. That's it. And so Hateful Eight is number 8.
It's like a boxer where it's like they say about certain boxers, if they say they're punched out, it just means there's just nothing left in the tank. And you're right, Woody Allen is one of the, there is very few that can do it over a long period. Woody Allen is one of them. But even he had a very dead period. I mean, there's 15, 20 years of just what? It was the same movie.
In the wilderness.
Yeah, it was just too much. It was the same movie every year. And then I think with Match Point. And,
for sure.
Now he's just...
When he leaves New York, it's like he's revitalized.
Yes. So, but yeah, it's hard. You're right. I think you've kind of given everything your body and your mind and your heart can give. And then you sit back and lecture and teach, I guess.
Talk.
Sure. Well, it's giving all that you can give, and we've talked extensively about his upbringing and how he wanted to give back to the people around him. But also, I mean, at this point we've covered so much, and I just want to ask you guys if there's anything that you want to jump in and tag really quickly, because like there's still so much we could talk about. I mean, we talked about how he co-founded the Directors Guild of America, was 3-time president of the Directors Guild, 4-time president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and during his presidencies, he was doing everything in his power to create an environment of greater artistic freedom for other filmmakers. And I think that's incredibly cool as well, and is so in line with everything else that we've learned about him. So jumping anywhere on the timeline, like what have we not hit in Capra's sphere that really demands attention?
Influence.
Yes.
I would like to say that one of my favorite movies ever made, I'm not even sure you were born, from 1984.
I was not.
Joe Dante's Gremlins.
Gremlins is wonderful.
Unofficial remake of It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay, go on.
Bedford Falls. It's all basically the same story, the same movie, because he was so inspired being a young person by that film that when he got a chance to basically have Chris Columbus's great script, he decided not to make it really a cutie monster movie. He really decided to kind of remake It's a Wonderful Life. That's the influence in the modern day. I think that's amazing.
Okay, so before we went on here, we were talking about Christmas movies.
Yes.
And I'm always in search of ones I've never seen before, or ones that aren't very popular. So, Karie, I want to tell you, the one that I discovered this year was 29th Street.
Oh, what a great film. What a great film.
Starring Danny Aiello. It was done in the mid 80s.
Anthony LaPaglia.
Amazing
film.
Right. Okay. So I watched it with people that just are not film critics per se, but just normal film watchers. And there was some moments a little dated. There was some moments where it was a little bit long, which is why I don't think it has the shelf life of some of these other classics we've talked about, or the Capra stuff. But if you hang on to the end, there's a beautiful ending. And if you really break it all down, the structure of the film, the music, how things end, you're like, this guy's a fan of Capra. And so I went and did some research on the writer and the director, and sure enough, Capra. But
sure.
So if you want a modern day Christmas film that's very similar to It's a Wonderful Life, it takes place in like 80s New York, loosely based on a true story, but you see that influence there.
It's the lottery ticket, right?
Yes.
I just want to make sure it's a great film.
It's that
Amazing.
one. Just check it out if you can.
Really
I actually
good.
I had to order it online because it's not readily available.
Really smart movie too. Yeah. I remember that.
And speaking of influence, I'll tell you some of the most cynical filmmakers and writers I know that are what you're talking about, Lex, the snark,
Sure.
snarky, and just I don't know one that hasn't melted over Capra.
It's impossible not to.
Yeah, but you would think so. Whether it's Seth MacFarlane or Alexander Payne.
Sure.
These are people that I know for a fact just you super duper appreciate Capra. I know Alexander Payne has read his autobiography. I know he used to go every Christmas in New York to watch It's a Wonderful Life. And I love that. I love how they all kind of melt. to Capra. The people you would think would be just so cynical and write this off as Capricorn and this kind of sentiment is fluff. Oh, that's not the real world, but yet they all are fans, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And even some of the most prolific commercial filmmakers of all time very, very openly tip their hat to Capra. I mean, I was watching, like I said, It's a Wonderful Life yesterday, and so many times during the Pottersville sequence, I went, "Oh, this is the dark 1985 from Back to the Future Part 2. There's so many direct parallels." And it was literally the finest point on it for me was when George Bailey sees the gravestone of his brother, who he never existed to save. That's Marty McFly seeing George McFly's tombstone in the dark 1985. You know what I mean? So the DNA of Capra's films are everywhere. It's really, really cool and really astounding how truly ubiquitous his work is, which is how somebody like me can labor under the delusion that they had seen one of his movies for such a long time without ever actually having seen it. So astounding body of work.
I think when I was in film school, I was a teaching assistant, so I would project the movies and introduce them if my professor wasn't there. And sometimes in my office hours, students would walk in and be like, "Oh, I can't believe I have to write this paper about Orson Welles', and they'd complain. And I'd say to them, you cannot understand the present and the future of filmmaking and storytelling unless you understand the past.
Absolutely.
And I think some of the best minds in the industry are the ones who do. Quentin, Spielberg, Curtis Hanson, Alexander Payne. A lot of those people, they watch Sofia Coppola. They watch a ton of classic movies.
I will say all of those people. I have not met one super talented, and I'm older than you guys, I've been in the business longer, and I've been blessed enough to meet a lot of super successful writers and directors, and I will tell you, all of them are familiar with the greats. Very familiar. To that point when I was 23 and I was not, I felt so stupid and so ignorant that I said, I better get to work, and I did. And now I can at least converse with these people and understand what they're talking about. But I literally don't know one. From David O. Russell to Alexander to Tarantino, I don't know. Even Scorsese.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Right? He just he's an encyclopedia of film knowledge.
Absolutely.
So I feel like if you're out there and you are an aspiring filmmaker, you have to.
That's how you learn.
You just
Yeah.
And by the way, Scorsese introduces some of the movies on
go.
this, as does Ron Howard and Michel Gondry. So I say this every episode when you guys always ask for final thoughts. I just say, darn it, see the movies.
I'm in. I'm so in on those. I can't wait. That's going to be, for me, when after Oscar season, you ever notice how films we kind of, at the cinema, we go into this like dead spot
Usually,
before summer, blockbuster season. So this is on my list. And for me, my shout out is February is Turner Classic Movie Month. So speaking of, if you want to become educated on film and you want someone to select the films for you and not have any commercials and be free, if you have access to Turner Classic Movies, I don't work for them, but I always plug it because I want to see film carry on. But 1 month of all the Oscar selections and winners in all the different categories, and then you have the great interstitials by Robert Osborne, and I forget the younger guy's name.
Ben Minkwitz.
That's it. Thank you. And Ben and Robert give you such great backstory on these films. So anyway, that's my thing, and that's how I found all Capra's other films.
Yeah, so, and I would agree, Karie, as you say, whenever I do ask for final thoughts, you always do drive the point home. See these movies, and ladies and gentlemen, our audiences listening, both watching on YouTube and listening to us on iTunes, check this stuff out if you haven't already. I know many of you grew up watching It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas, but watch everything by Capra that you can get your hands on. And my fellow panelists, are there any other thoughts about Capra that you want to throw out there before we wrap things up? Byron?
No, I think I covered it all. I think that was it. I mean, I love everything he's done, and I agree with Karie. See everything you can.
Absolutely.
And if your local theater does happen to show any of these on the big screen, because a lot of them do It's a Wonderful Life of a local movie palace anywhere around America, by all means, see it that way.
Yes.
That is the best way to experience this stuff.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I would say especially to younger people, I don't care how impressive your home theater setup is. It is not a substitute for going to the movie theater.
Right.
That is the optimum way to experience any motion picture. Certainly something as gorgeous with the depth and the I'm going to use the word loveliness.
The
of
loveliness,
Capra.
and you're going to a theater, so you're going to be seated with like-minded people who are also going to be on the journey with you, and there's also that great energy you'll get. And my final thought is, tell a friend. Tell someone else about Capra and keep this going. And if it's even just It's a Wonderful Life, I've done it every year. I usually find somebody who's not seen this film. I'll say, please come over, let's screen it together. And 100% so far, it's been like, this is the missing piece to my life, and it becomes part of tradition. So just at the very least, if you could tell someone else about it, that's all. Because I just want to see this guy's work and his message keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Spread the love around. And I think that's going to do it for us this week on Historic Hollywood. Kevin Undergaro, thank you so much for being here
Thank you.
with
Thank you.
us.
Our guest.
Where can people find you on the internet?
At Undergaro.
At Undergaro.
Simple.
Karie, where can people find you?
At Film Radar.
And Byron?
At Byron Lee.
And I am all over social media at the Lex Michael. Happy 2016, everybody. We're back.
Happy
Hope
New
you all
Year.
had a happy New Year. And we will see you next time on Historic Hollywood.
Look at this. We get some music going from it.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, Christian Harloff, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of its owners or principals.